Hi everybody, welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today this was a completely unplanned video. We just happened to be having a conversation about something. And I mentioned to Alex that I was searching something on Facebook yesterday, or many days ago, assuming you're watching this in the future, and came across one of his posts where he said he was on, I think, dive 5 or 6 of the trip, and noted that he had shot over 800 pictures, I think. And that is quite the contrast to how I typically shoot. So I think we're just going to talk about the differences in shooting styles. How much do you shoot? What the advantages or disadvantages are of different shooting styles. So Alex, if you would want to take it away.
Yeah. So I accept that I shoot a lot of pictures, and I don't feel it has a negative impact on my photography. So I haven't really been over analytical of it, but I do, and I'm very lucky that I get to dive with a huge number of underwater photographers during the year. And I would say that I'm definitely in the top 5% of the amount of pictures that anyone takes on a dive. I would say, to be honest, most dives I probably take more pictures than anyone. So it's probably I'm the top 1%. But I usually dive with 20 people, so top 5% is kind of the same as the top 1%. But yeah, I always shoot a lot of pictures, and because I'm technically a very experienced underwater photographer, all my pictures tend to come out. I'm not shooting loads of bad pictures. My pictures generally have good focus, good lighting, good composition, and I just shoot a lot of frames. And I'm not overly analytical of that, because I feel that it works for me. My pictures are doing well. I don't feel that it would makes a difference. That said, I think if I was limited to, say, being only able to shoot 36 pictures on a dive, just to pluck a random number out of history, I don't think it would make that much difference to the quality of my shots. I would probably just spend a bit more time planning, whereas I've just learned to make the process of shooting almost part of the planning, in that I'll be shooting wide angle, and I'll be like, rather than maybe spending some time thinking exactly where I want to be, I might be just shoot, review, my way to finding that ideal shot. Knowing that, that approach gives me time to be polishing up other details as well. And maybe I might get lucky and capture something along the way, but I don't think it's something that I've put a lot of thought into. I think it's more something that just happens naturally to me. And it's not something that I would encourage others to necessarily follow. But yeah, I would say that on most trips, I would shoot at about that rate, about a couple of hundred pictures a dive. So, I usually end up, if I do a 4-dive day, it's going to be, most of 800, 900 images. And you multiply that by the number of days, and that's pretty close to what I shoot in terms of a trip. If I do a 6-day trip, it's usually 5,000-6,000. If it's a 2-week trip, it's usually getting up towards 10,000 pictures. And that's pretty normal for me. And I'm not, I don't use, digga. That's how many times I'm moving my finger backwards and forwards. I very rarely, I'm not talking about doing trips where it's big animals in the blue and you've got high frame rates on. This is, with flash, normal reef, sort of normal dive photography. The final thing I'll say before I want to contrast that with your perspective, and I think I'll come back to this at the end, actually. So we also dive very differently. I typically go on dive trips, do multiple dives per day by dive boat. And those dives, because I'm with groups or, with a resort, they're often limited to 60 minutes and a bit more as a general dive time. Whereas your diving tends to often be much longer, but less frequent. And sort of ironically, you might imagine that I would be the parsimonious one with the number of pictures I take, and you'd be, I'm in the water finally, I'm doing a really long dive, I'm going to, shoot everything that moves. And you're really the opposite. So Matt, what's your kind of numbers roughly on the top of your head, and how do you sort of make that work for you?
So I can tell you exactly the most pictures I've ever shot in a day was the day I photographed pink salmon in Vancouver. I was in the water for 6.5 hours, and I took 637 pictures. So that's the most I've ever shot in a day, and that's remarkable for me. So it's funny because the most pictures I usually shoot are on like the freshwater trips here, because you're not limited by a tank necessarily. And even then, I'll feel like I've taken a ton of pictures, and then I get back and upload them on the computer, and it's like, oh, you have 61 pictures from today, and I've been in the water for 4 hours. So and on dives, it's even less. If I take 50 pictures on a dive, I was probably underwater for 2 or 3 hours on that dive, and probably found 4 or 5 different subjects that seemed well worth the time to photograph them. And it's not a conscious thing where I just don't shoot a lot. I don't shoot a lot. And I'll be on dives with friends who are photographing the same things, and they'll come back and have shot 150 frames and I've shot 30. So I don't entirely know why. And like you said, it's interesting because you would think with my less time and my less opportunity to shoot in the water that I would be photographing literally everything. And I don't entirely know why I don't do that. But it's been that way forever. And I talk with bird friends a lot because they'll be like, yeah, I went out today and shot 4,000 frames. And even when I've gone out and photographed birds, I'll take 100. And it's definitely not conscious, and I don't necessarily think it's a benefit to my photography. I think I probably would benefit from shooting more. But for whatever reason, when I'm down there, I just don't necessarily find myself, taking a whole bunch of pictures. And even when I find something that I'm really thrilled on, and I think I've like the last subject, probably the batfish when I was using the EMWL, and I'm like, all right, I took a ton of pictures of this thing, and then I look at them and I've taken 15 or 20, and it felt like I've taken a ton, but I work kind of slowly, and I'm obviously not as technically proficient as you, so it's going to take me a bit longer to figure it out. But I don't take a lot of images, and I seem to be more in a minority with regards to wildlife and underwater even than most people. But then it means I have a lot to look through.
So I would say that most people shoot kind of around like 80 to 100 on a normal dive. Maybe, so I think that you're definitely right at the low end. And that's like doing normal diving, not the long dives that you do. And I think that I'm definitely at the high end. So, both of us, it works for us. And I think the first thing is, there's an innate rhythm in the way you want to shoot and work. I would say that I'm usually pretty quick with subjects, and that's partly because I'm nearly always diving running workshops. So I'm usually either last on a subject, or if I happen to arrive somewhere first, I'm usually pretty conscious that I need to get off it pretty fast. So I'm generally a very quick decision maker, a quick worker with subjects. And that's also perhaps why I'm fast, because I'm always onto something else. And I think that does harm my photography. I do think at times I let good opportunities slip by because I've, found a great setup and I'm shooting it and I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And I'll go off and then spend the next half an hour shooting just average stuff. Yeah. The average stuff is quite useful to me because I'm not just about creating that one great shot. I do, quite a lot of stock photography. And as a result, it's good to have that coverage that by moving around does. But it means I think sometimes when I come to review my shots, I'm like, oh, that was a really good opportunity. And I perhaps could have made a bit more from it. But that's sort of just, I wouldn't say, so I do sometimes feel that I should perhaps slow down, try and shoot a bit less during the dive, and, think a little bit more underwater. But I usually don't feel like I've left much on the table at the time. And it's maybe only in review that I do.
Yeah, well, that's when I notice it too, because I'll look back and that's when I'll realize, oh, I could have done this, or I could have done that, or I'll take, some half-assed shot of something, and I'm like, man, I should have spent more time with that. But you also, well, at least for me, I don't necessarily want to consciously be forcing myself to take more pictures underwater just for the sake of doing it. If I felt that maybe it would benefit me, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it would. And again, also I'm usually diving. I don't travel a whole lot, so I'm not shooting in new places all the time.
Yeah.
It might be a bit different were I doing that. But that said, even when I have traveled, I don't necessarily come back with thousands and thousands of images. I remember my trip to Lembe, I came back and I had only shot, I think, like 1,200 something pictures over a 10-day trip. So
I wouldn't do that. Yeah, I think my last trip to Lembe. Well, I can look it up, but it'll take me a sec. So I don't think my well, no, my Lightroom is open. If you will bear with me a second, I shall scroll down. And my last trip to Lembe was longer. It was a longer trip than I normally do. And day 18, so it's an 18 shooting day trip, and the last picture number is, so I've got to move it, is, yeah, so I shot 21, is it 21,000? Oh no, it's 11,000 maybe, because I started it. Yeah, so, but it's a lot. There's no excusing it. So yeah, I mean, I think what I would sort of, which is almost like, that's ridiculously amount. No, so, but yeah, I think it must have been about 12,000 I shot for the trip, which is basically 10 times more than you, where I probably did maybe twice as many dives, but certainly no more than twice as many.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous, it's a whole order of magnitude out of control. So the only real punishments, of course, for shooting lots of frames are, well, for the silly things like you're going to run your batteries down quicker, so a bit more recharging stuff to do. But really, it's the editing. And I think what is a really important part of my photography is that I'm very, very harsh with my editing. And I might shoot 6 or 7 shots of a particular wide angle scene, but I will very quickly reduce that to 1. And then I will decide whether I want to keep that 1 or actually there's better wide angle scenes on the dive and I'll delete that. So hand in hand with shooting a lot is being very cutthroat with editing. And I just want to get stuff off my computer. I want to refine and refine and refine. I'm not interested in a good shot. I want a really special shot. So, if the amphias aren't quite lined up, if the soft coral is billowing away in the current, those pictures are gone straight away. If there's a nice, if the background movement of fish isn't quite peak of the action, it's gone. And I'll keep that 1 or 2 shots that just all those little details are right. So hopefully when people look at my pictures, they're like, wow, how did he get that? How did he get that? How did he get that? And I didn't get all those things when I shoot every frame, but I have made sure that I've edited down to the pictures where all those little details are just that little bit special. So, obviously the framing, the focus, the exposure, the composition is all nice. And then you've just got that little sprinkling of something special on top of that.
Well, there is one of the advantages to shooting a lot too, though, is that you have more frames to choose from a particular dive or particular scene. If you're shooting it a lot, is you could have that chance to have the amphias in the perfect position and the coral, upright and perfectly vertical. Whereas if you're, shooting 4 pictures, you might not have as many to choose from, and you have to end up settling or delete them all from a particular.
But it's not always shooting more frames gets you those things. It's more important to recognize the potential in a subject matter in a scene that this is going to come together and be good. Staying in front of something and shooting 50 pictures doesn't mean that any of the 50 will be good.
Yeah,
so I think people shouldn't get overly hung up on it. I would say it's good to have some choice, but you also, I think, you need to make that choice. Otherwise, your Lightroom catalog just gets mired in everything being the same, and you can never find those good shots. So, if you are going to shoot a lot more, delete a lot more. I think the best advice I've got really to close this discussion is a classic piece of underwater photography advice, which is kind of aimed at newer photographers, and I sort of tell it to newer photographers a lot. But I think it's something we can all be reminded of, which is the classic advice of take more pictures of less subjects on a dive. And I think that's sort of, answers 2 of the criticisms that newer photographers tend to do. They tend to go around just taking 1 or 2 shots of everything they see. And photographers who are trying to create really special images will generally decide what are the key things they want to photograph on a dive, and then invest time and invest frames. But it's really the time that matters, not so much the frames, on those key subjects, those key opportunities during the dive, and hopefully as a result get something special.
Yeah, for sure. Like, especially I dive mostly at the bridge. Everybody comes here and they're like, I want to see this. It's like, okay, we can see all those things and you can go home with a bunch of okay pictures, or we can find 3 of them and you can spend, 45 minutes on each and go home with, a couple great shots. So it's, it depends on how you want to shoot and dive and what your goals are, I suppose. But For photography, I would absolutely second that more frames, less subjects, than try to photograph every single thing you're seeing.
Yeah, and that then goes back to that whole thing of, think about before the dive what you're likely to see, optimize your gear, optimize your thinking around seeing that subject, and then hopefully you'll get a standout shot, not just another underwater photo.
Yep.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for watching the Underwater Photography Show. We really appreciate your support, and we'll be back again soon with another episode. Bye.
Bye, guys.